So what if I told you a small little football club off the south coast of England has become one of the best-selling clubs in world football? Well, you'll probably ask me, how did they do it? Who's the brains behind it? And ultimately, what does the future hold for AFC Bournemouth? Well, let's find out. Welcome to another episode of TAMFC, where we break down football developments holistically to inform the opinions of football fans and ultimately make it easy for viewers to digest. So let me take you back as far as the 2020-2021 season. Things were looking pretty dismal for Bournemouth, who had just finished 6th in the Championship, had got knocked out in the playoffs, and had been relegated from the Premier League the season prior. But then at the start of the 2021-2022 season, they hired Championship guru Scott Parker as the football manager of the club. And with him in charge, they finished 2nd and got promoted to the Premier League. Now this is where things start to get interesting. So listen up. So up until then, Bournemouth had been operating pretty frugally, only really buying players that they could afford. And most importantly, not overpaying for players. So when they got promoted to the Premier League, they bought players like Marcus Tavernier and Gary Cahill on a free. But that's when Black Knight Football Group bought the club from then owner Maxim Denim. And a bit of background on Maxim Denim. He was basically the man who bought the club back in 2011 for about £800,000 and was able to take the club all the way from League One to the Premier League within a couple of seasons. Very impressive, I must say. But anyways, Black Knight Football are actually a football group who also owns Portuguese club Moreirense and French Ligue 1 club Lorient. And they went on to buy Bournemouth in 2022 for about £120 million. And the owner of Black Knight, businessman Bill Foley, was then appointed as the chairman of Bournemouth Football Club. And according to The Athletic, Black Knight Football Group injected about £93 million into the club. And they did this through loans from the parent company, Turquoise Limited, and through selling shareholder equity. And they even brought aboard Michael B. Jordan as a minority owner in the club. You know, the actor from Black Panther and Creed? Yes, that guy. Anyways, sorry, I digress. So in Bournemouth's first transfer window under Black Knight, they changed their transfer strategy completely and started to buy players more adventurously. They started to acquire top prospects from other top leagues and top teams all over Europe, such as Dango Outara from sister club Lorient for 20 million, Marco Senesi from Feyenoord for 13 million, Ilian Zabani from Dinamo Kiev for 24 million, Antoine Semenyo from Bristol City for 10.5 million. And by the end of the season, they actually did pretty well. They avoided relegation altogether and finished 15th. Now, most football fans were not aware of the absolute revolution that was about to transpire at Bournemouth. Because up until then, Bournemouth were just known as a yo-yo club. You know, a team that just comes in and out of the Premier League and more or less just ends up fighting in a relegation scrap. But under Richard Hughes, who is the former player at the club and was the sporting director of the club since 2014, he was basically now allowed to take the club to the next level. And so he did, by first hiring Rayo Vallecano manager Andoni Iraola to be the manager and head coach of AFC Bournemouth. And from there, Richard Hughes went absolutely crazy in the transfer market, buying top prospects from all over Europe to match Andoni Iraola's high-pressing, high-intensity, gegenpress style of football. And so he signed players like Justin Kluivert from Roma, Alex Scott from Bristol City, Tyler Adams and Luis Siniestra from Leeds United, to name but a few signings. And by the end of the 2023-24 season, they actually did pretty well and ended up finishing in 12th position. But the season after, which would have been the 2024-25 season, unfortunately, Richard Hughes left for Liverpool. And his understudy, Simon Francis, then replaced him as the sporting director. And together with the president of football operations, Tiago Pinto, Francis and Pinto basically continued with the blueprint that Richard Hughes had left for them. Basically, they turned the heat all the way up. Firstly, by selling Dominic Solanke to Spurs for 65 million, a very impressive deal, I must say, from Bournemouth. And then they went on to sign even more top prospects from all over Europe, such as Dean Aitchison from Juventus for 15 million, Julian Araujo from Barcelona, Ivan Nielsen from Porto for 40 million, and Eli Junior Krupi from Lorient for £10 million. And then, of course, Enes Unal from Getafe for 13 million, although he wasn't really a young player. Anyways, I digress. So that season, they continued on the upward trajectory that the club had already set and finished 9th in the league. However, the 2025-26 season was really an era-defining season for Bournemouth and the Iraola era under the Black Knight Football Group. Here's why. Now, because Andoni Iraola had implemented such a super high and super intense style of football, basically gegenpress on steroids, a very direct style of play that took a lot of intensity and required a lot of stamina from the players, which basically meant that only a certain profile of player would be able to make it and succeed in this system. Now, if you're wondering, this sort of system basically included a high press, vertical transitions, fast breaks, high possession turnover in the final third, and he usually played with a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, which included technical midfielders and centre-backs, which were crucial to the build-up play and ball progression. Also, Iraola wasn't afraid to tweak his system mid-match, often adjusting pressing triggers or switching wingers to gain tactical advantage. Ultimately, this sort of system requires highly technical, fast players who are also intelligent but also quick to adapt to in-match situations. Now, the reason last season was so important for the Iraola era at Bournemouth was because up until then, which was basically the summer of 2025, he had developed a really strong defensive team, even though they played a very attacking brand of football, which only conceded 46 goals and scored a whopping 58 during the 2024-25 season, where they finished 9th overall. Now, at the beginning of the following season, which would have been the 2025-26 season, they sold a lot of key players, such as Ilya Zaibani, who was sold to PSG for 55 million, Dean Heischerson, who was sold to Real Madrid for 50 million, Milos Kerkez, who was sold to Liverpool for 40 million, and Dango Ouattara, who was sold to Brentford for 45 million. And don't forget, in January, they sold their best player and top scorer, Antoine Semenyo, to Man City for £65 million. And do notice that all of these players were sold for twice or at least thrice the amount of money that they were initially bought for. So an absolute masterclass in transfers. Sorry, I digress. Now, this mass sale of key players coincided with a massive injury crisis within the squad. During that January, a few key players were nursing long-term injuries, which included players like Enes Unal, Tyler Adams, Ben Doak, and Justin Kluivert, to name but a few. And then on top of that, new signing Amin Adli and their star striker from the previous season, Ivan Nielsen, weren't on great form either. Now, for me personally, I for sure thought that this was the end of this great run of form by Bournemouth. And in my opinion, I thought that they would probably end up in a relegation scrap or finish somewhere on the bottom half of the table. But boy, was I wrong. Let me explain why. So the core of the team kept performing at a very high level, week in and week out. Players such as Alex Scott, Tavernier, Marco Senesi, James Hill, and new signings like goalkeeper Petrovic, Adrian Truffet, and Alex Jimenez really stepped up to the plate. And then most notably, French star boy Eli Junior Krupi and 25-year-old wonderkid signing from Vasco da Gama, Ryan, really filled the void that Antoine Semenyo had left. Krupi bagged 13 league goals last season to finish as the club's top scorer, whilst Ryan, who only joined in January, scored 5 goals and had 3 assists in 15 matches, and earned himself a call-up to the Brazil World Cup squad. Now, during the 2025-26 season, Bournemouth ended up finishing in 6th place, a club record and the highest ever spot that they've ever finished in the club's history, and they secured themselves a Europa League spot. Now, part of the reason why I believe that Bournemouth is one of the best-selling clubs in world football is because some of the star players who are currently playing for the team, such as Eli Krupi, Alex Scott, and Ryan, have all been valued at £80 million plus. And it looks likely that Alex Scott will leave the club this season for a transfer fee close to that sort of figure. But now the question that a lot of fans have is basically, what does the future hold for Bournemouth Football Club? Well, as of 2026, technical director Simon Francis has left and been replaced by former player Matt Ritchie, who will now work with the president of football operations, Thiago Pinto. And Iraola has also left Bournemouth to join Liverpool as the club's head manager. But ultimately for Bournemouth, it's business as usual. They've already signed Alvaro Rodriguez from Elche, and top Portuguese international and prospect Antonio Silva for £25 million from Benfica to replace Marco Senesi, who left on a free to join Tottenham Hotspurs. And Marco Rose, who is lined up to be Iraola's replacement, will basically fit Bournemouth like a glove. Not only is Rose a former coach of major selling clubs like Red Bull Leipzig and Red Bull Salzburg and Borussia Dortmund, where he won the Austrian Bundesliga and the DFB Pokal, but as his CV suggests, he is actually very good at working with and developing young players and taking them to the next level, which is a perfect fit for Bournemouth. And his style of play is very similar to Iraola's, which includes building up from the back, quick ball progression, high pressing, high ball retention in the opposition half, fast counter-attacking, direct play with forwards, and exploiting the spaces out wide with lots of quick vertical passes into space. Marco Rose will most likely deploy a 4-2-3-1, 4-4-2, or a 3-4-3 with a double pivot, which is key to building up and counters. Now, honestly, this shows just how good the continuity is within Bournemouth and the Black Knight Football Group. Now, this sort of club management can only happen when the club has a clear identity, philosophy, ethos, style of recruitment and selling players that they are willing to stick to and are not scared to stick to through good and bad times. Now, the other question that a lot of fans might have is, why are Bournemouth doing so well despite all the managerial changes, the changes in sporting director, and all of the selling of the key players? Well, the answer comes down to efficient club ownership and management. And what do I mean by this? Well, basically, Bill Foley, when he bought this small club with a small stadium that they didn't even own, in a small city to the south coast of England, really had faith in the club that he had just bought. He firstly injected the club with 100 million as soon as he took over and allowed sporting directors to buy players that could only be considered probably too good for the club's stature. And he also allowed the sporting directors to hire the best manager possible to fit the club's philosophy and ethos. In a candid interview with The Athletic in 2024, Foley said that he had bigger plans for the club, which included buying back the stadium and increasing the capacity of the Vitality Stadium, building a new training ground, all of this which he has actually already achieved or is busy with as of 2026. And even as far back as 2024, he had plans for the club to go on to qualify for Europe, which he ultimately has achieved by the end of 2026. And ultimately, he believes that the club is just getting started with their upward trajectory. Basically, Bill Foley is a very ambitious owner, and some of his plans coincide with upgrading the city of Bournemouth as a whole. But let me know in the comment section. We'd love to hear from some of you guys. Is Bournemouth one of the best-selling clubs in world football? Whether you agree or disagree, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Thank you for watching another episode of TAMFC, where we break down football developments holistically and ultimately inform the opinions of football fans while making it easier for viewers to digest.